Hello, hello, Whiskers. Welcome to our 1 year anniversary. Yes, it's true. 1 year ago today, I uploaded my first video. With worse sound and terrible sound mixing, this was my first video, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim book review on the 16th of September. If you want to go back and watch that and compare, I will warn you that my title cards are ridiculously loud. And I'm just gonna leave my mistakes lie. They're part of our history. So thank you guys so much for the continued support. I really appreciate it. I had the goal of reaching 100 subscribers by the time the channel was 1 year old, and we've already surpassed that. So thank you so much. Um, we already had a celebration around that. The Discord channel was created for that. So if you want to have a look, I'll pin that video. But I don't want to go on too long. Just thank you, because this video will be long enough. To celebrate, we are going to do this new tier list that I created. It's called Tropes in Tiers. I will also link it down below if you're interested in doing it yourself. And we're gonna categorize all these storycraft tropes into the different categories. So let's go through the categories. First, love it, give me more. I think that's obvious. I absolutely adore these tropes, and I will probably like a story if it includes these. Always good is just solid A plus good storytelling tropes. Expected is sort of boring. It's sort of meh. It's neither good nor bad. It's just always there. Only when done right or subverted. These are tropes that are tricky, that a lot of authors do wrong, that can easily go wrong. So, yeah, I think we'll get more into it for the examples when we get into tropes categorized here. Enough is enough is tropes that I feel like are overdone. You can't really improve upon them. There's been too much of it, and I'm sick of it now. Never should have been a thing is tropes that I have hated since the beginning of their existence and will continue to hate, and they never should have existed. No matter how old the story is, this trope is not acceptable to me. I don't actually know if one of the tropes will fall under this category, but it's there in case anyway. Okay, so without further ado, let's start categorizing. These do not have labels in, but lucky for you guys, I was there when it was written. So I remember all of these, even though there aren't specific labels to them. The first one is the chosen one trope. I think this is very easy to categorize, only when done right or subverted. It's not something you can completely throw away, but sometimes prophecy and a chosen person can be an interesting aspect to a story. It's sort of the great man type of thing, type of philosophy and ideology, which I think can be really good when subverted or when done right, when the characters actually feel the pressure of it. So Harry Potter is sort of the standard, but then you have Eye of the World where it's treated a little bit differently, and I think it's refreshing to see it treated differently. Next one is different cultures. This one is it's sort of expected because it almost occurs in every story, but I'm gonna have to put it in only when done right or subverted, because we all know a book where there's a culture with a clear parallel to the real world, and it's just sort of racist, and there's a lot of stereotypes, and it's only when done right, because I think creating new cultures can be really interesting if they're not just stereotypes, if they aren't just Planet of the Hats type of thing. It's actually interesting. Um, every person from this planet wears the same hat. They all are logical, or they all are animalistic. Every single person on that planet is the same. It's taking a cultural stereotype and expanding it to an entire planet, and it's ridiculous. Obviously, individuals have personality, but it kind of strips a whole culture of their individuality, and all the people of this culture are the same, and that's when it's done badly. So the next one is the Dark Lord. I am sick of this. I am sick of unambiguously evil characters. I don't care if you have a dark backstory to go with that. It's just, I need there to be reasons. I like the more Thanos type of character, where the goal is good. The way of getting to that goal, the motivation, and the ends justifying the means, that type of argument is a lot more interesting to me than just bad man bad. So I don't love that. Next one is death. This is sort of expected. It's not a trope that is good or bad for me, it's just sort of always there. So the next picture represents diversity. And I think, so this is sort of in between, only when done right, and always good. But I'm going to leave it in always good. Because obviously, if you're going to be racist and sexist in your portrayal, then it is sort of the same thing as what we spoke about culture, stereotyping people. But I think diversity just makes the world a little bit more interesting and a lot more realistic. If you really go into any of our ancient cultures, there is more to it than the wasp. And yeah, I really like seeing that in stories. Even if you create your own diversity of races and cultures and sexualities and things, I think diversity just makes everything a little bit more colorful. Next one, dreams. I want to put it in always when done right, but I'm sort of sick of it too. So it's in between here, but I'm going to drop it in. Enough is enough. Having your story start on a dream sequence where there's an epic battle and then the character wakes up and none of it meant a thing. Oh my word, no. And yes, dreams can be used to symbolize and wada wada, but it's too overt and I don't like it. Actually, the more I'm thinking about this, I kind of just don't like dreams. I think it's lazy. Nope, don't like dreams. Never should have been a thing. Okay, this one. Okay, next up, enemies to lovers. I don't like it. I'm kind of sick of seeing it, especially in smut and romance. Because the argument at the beginning is always so trivial and silly, and they're just forced into situations with each other, and I just don't know whether it's realistic. It's that line, that fine line between love and hate, and I just don't think that's the truth. I don't like it. I think it was a novel concept at a time, but I think it's completely overplayed. Next up, the escape. I love this. I absolutely love this in stories. Where characters are trapped in seemingly impossible situations and they have to escape. Because there's a clear goal, there's a clear motivation for the goal, so you don't have to waste time on that type of things. You can just build up the setting and have the action take place. You don't need to give your character enough of a reason to escape. People want their freedom. This is part of being a human being. So definitely, I love this. It just gives a story a lot of needed tension without the author having to put a lot of work and pages into it. Next one is also something I absolutely love. Just go on the right side. This is the Achilles heel, the fatal flaw, the character that just, honestly, all characters, every culture, every aspect of your story should have this. A weakness, a weak point. They're strong overall, but then they have this one thing that can be exploited. It should be clear what are the strengths and weaknesses of every aspect of your story. You have this superpower, but what does it cost you? Or how can it be exploited? So you have the power of flight, but maybe you tend to overuse it, and that's a weakness that your enemies can exploit. So I really, really love this, and I think it's something, especially in character creation, which has to be taken into account. What are the weaknesses of this aspect? And if you think about storytelling like that, then you have a lot more room to have interesting things happen. So next is the flashback. Also, sort of enough is enough for this one. I think there are more interesting ways to tell a story. And if you have too many flashbacks, well, you're probably starting your story in the wrong place. Um, and there are just more interesting ways. Don't take me back to how the character felt then. Tell me what they think about it looking back now. I I'm just had enough of flashbacks, I think. This little image represents for the children. And I think we can drop it right in there because I'm sort of sick of seeing this, but I do think the trope still has a lot of potential. So this is for the children. So this is characters fighting, or their main motivation is the next generation. What's going to happen to the children? Protecting the children, making life better for the children. I really think it can be used very well, but sometimes you need more than just for the children. So only when done right or subverted, because sometimes for the children can be used in a very cheap way. Then we have the found family. And I might get a lot of slack for this, but I sort of think enough is enough. I'm so sick of seeing this. I get it. Some characters are lonely and then they find their people and they're good friends, but then they sort of have this family dynamic. It's sweet. It's just sort of boring. I am not a massive fan of this. And maybe only when done right, but overall, when I hear about a found family, I am going to turn away. It's just, it sort of feels cheap to me at this point. Right up next is also something that I might get a bit of flack for, but that I'm sort of sick of. Friends to lovers. I it's just so overdone. And I don't think there's really a way to subvert the trope or to make it more interesting. I'm definitely open to the idea, but I just can't see it. It's been so overdone. Yeah, they've been friends for years, and this boy hurt her, and now she's found that the right person was there all along. It's just like the "it was inside of you all along" thing. I just, honestly, for lovers, either the chemistry is there or it's not. And if it's not there, then I'm not going to be convinced that it suddenly bloomed over the course of a week. No. So, I don't like it. Next up, friends. Sort of expected, sort of always good. Think I'm gonna drop it in always good. So yeah, this is just pretty basic. Characters should have good friendships. Not every relationship should be a romance, and friendships can be complicated and more complicated than romances, I think, because there are less rules of how it should be. We have a lot of strict, sort of heteronormative rules about how a romance should look and what the relationship should be like, and we have a set number of ways that it can form. Friendships have a lot more to them, and I think they're underrated. Friendship is underrated. So let me take you through my thought process for this one. This is the genius character. So it's sort of expected. A lot of stories have this. And I'm thinking sometimes it could be OP, so maybe only done right when subverted. But no. Actually, if you really have a genius character, then they usually add a lot to the story. They use the magic system or the issues in the story, they look at it from an interesting perspective. So the more I think about it, the more I just love a genius character because that means thought has gone into the plot, even if by a main character himself. And I really love that. So I love a genius character. They always come up with new and interesting solutions. So love it, give me more. Then we have the hard magic system. Absolutely love a hard magic system. Why do you keep doing that? Go there. Go there. There we go. Absolutely love a hard magic system. I don't think I need to say more. It helps you to know where the limits are and where the weaknesses is. So the hard magic system and the Achilles heel and the genius, all of these go together so well. Next one is the binary of good and evil and a sort of honor system. So your character is honorable. That's why he saves the girl. And I don't like it. And I think it never should have been a thing. Because in history, honor was sort of made up as you go along. There was, of course, the knight's code of being honorable and taking care of fair maidens and wada wada, but it was only really enforced or done when they wanted to. It wasn't something that was actually hardline law. So, yeah, honor is just it's cheap motivation, and I don't like it. I don't think it's good enough as a motivation. It's just this is the right thing to do, and that's the only reason. I'm sorry, what? No, you should have some more motivation behind that. This little guy represents Am I the Monster? And I love it. See Frankenstein. See any book written from the bad guy's point of view, where, okay, Frankenstein is not exactly this, but a book written from the bad guy's point of view, where he's just doing everything that he thinks is right to do, and then over time he realizes that he's in the wrong and he's causing a lot more harm than good. And I think that is a really good way to do the villain and to give them some sort of redemption at the end. Is yes, yes. Am I the monster? Top trope. Okay, so Zeus down here represents immortality. So this is pretty common these days with like vampires and werewolves and all sorts of supernaturals. But when I think it really can be done right is when you actually look at what it means to be immortal. Not just you get really good at the piano, a la Edward, but actually, like, what would it be like to live forever? Are human souls meant to inhabit these bodies for the rest of time? Would you get bored? Would the planet not fill up? So, I think this is only when done right or subverted, because I think if you really look into it, there's a lot of interesting things you can do with that. The novel Future, which is science fiction, really good use of the ideas around what it would be like in a futuristic setting if everyone were immortal, and what would that mean for childbirth and seeing people with age. And I really love that when it's done right. Insta love never should have been a thing. I don't think we need to talk about that. That's pretty easy. This one is LGBT. I would say always good, obviously with the caveat that don't put in stereotypes. Please, authors, just meet real people. They aren't all the same. And I also think it's good to view every character as if they are bisexual to see who the actual best matches would be for them. And also to consider whether some characters should be ace, whether some characters might struggle with their gender identities, or just not care about gender that much, not care about it as much as we do. I think heteronormativity is so baked into our culture. It seems like a very good step in looking at another possible culture, creating a new culture, to look at whether that's really necessary and what another world might look like, and how much that heteronormativity affects our world and the roles we have around that. So, yes, I think LGBT aspects of a story are always good, and they always add something. Next is the Lost Advanced Civilization. I'm going to sort of put this also in only when done right and subverted, because it sort of becomes boring at the point. They lost because of hubris, they lost because of this, and humanity is going down the same path, and we have to learn from this ancient civilization and this. I'm bored, but I think it still has a lot of potential. I think it's the same for this next one, love triangles. Definitely, there is potential there to have an interesting love triangle, especially when linked up with the LGBT thing. Like, let's explore that a bit more. I don't just want two guys and one girl or two girls and one guy. Please give me more to that. Make make it interesting. Just give me more meat to a love triangle, please. And then I will be happy with it. Because drama is obviously good in books and romance is good in books. So let's make the romance complicated. Madness in stories. I love this. I love slowly watching a character go insane for good reason. Obviously, there are some issues with harmful stereotypes about mental health and mental health people being violent. So we can avoid that, please. But sometimes a character can just be going insane, and I love it. Not necessarily violently, but to be in that headspace and to try to write that type of thing and the emotions that must come up with that, with not knowing whether the world around you is real or not. I think that's great. Um, in the Dark Tower series, where Jake goes insane, I think that works really well. So, yeah, I love seeing that. Medieval Europe as a setting, especially in fantasy, I think it's sort of expected. I love castles. I love medieval Europe as a setting, but I think it is sort of meh. I will be impressed if a story does not have medieval Europe as a setting. So, yeah, it's just like that centerline meh sort of expected thing. Next up is the mentor. I don't like this. I feel like I'm sort of sick of it. He always has to die at some point so that the hero can move on. And he's just a cheap excuse to give us exposition. I want to see my main character struggling, and a mentor just makes it a little bit easy. When the mentor is insane or difficult, it it sort of adds a little bit, but I think it's just a cheap way to sort of skip past the learning stage. And if you want to skip past the learning stage, don't just give me a mentor explaining the magic system to me. Let's just skip past it. And then I can have the magic system explained to me in a very complicated fight. Just, I don't like mentors. I think they had a place at some point, but we're over that now. So, next one is messy timelines. Gonna drop that right in here. There's a big difference between messy timelines and interesting storytelling that can come from that, and just a mess. So it has to be done right. Mysteries. I love this. I think it's always good. Especially when it's sort of unexpected or a lie that the character is telling, and you sort of have to pick up on the clues yourself of where to find the truth. Because the character is lying, and especially in third person, maybe you won't know. And I really like that sort of aspect to it. Nicknames in stories. I have to put it in between these two. I sort of feel like enough is enough. If you've given your character this long, complicated, especially in fantasy, this long, complicated name, just. And then for the rest of the book, you only call her Danny. Why does she have the beautiful name? Why call her Daenerys Targaryen if you're not going to use Daenerys? It's a good name. Don't just call her Danny for the rest of the book. I don't like nicknames. Give them a name then that you actually want on the page. If you didn't want this name on the page, why does she have it? No, I'm not a fan of nicknames. I'm kind of sick of them. I'm not going to put in a never should have been a thing because I think there are 10% of uses where it could be done interesting, where it could be done well, but no, mostly no. Then next up we have the open-ended ending of a story. So it sort of stops before all the little knots have been tied up. I'm gonna drop this sort of unexpected because it's meh. Sometimes it can be really frustrating. Sometimes it can be good. It definitely depends on the story and the imagination. I don't think there's really a way to subvert it. I just think It depends. Sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's not. Next up, the orphan main character. I'm sick of it. I'm absolutely sick of orphans in stories. We get it. You need a way for the parents to get out of the way so that your teenage protagonist can go on a crazy adventure that nobody would let them do otherwise. It's just, I don't, it's just, I'm bored. I'm really bored of this. You can have them have bad parents and the repercussions of being, yeah. I think I've just seen seen too much of it. Next up is portals between worlds or universes. So this is pretty common in sci-fi and fantasy and the like. And I think it's good. I think it's just a solid, good trope to use. Um, Usually works pretty well and creates a distinct difference between our world and a different world. The world the character knows and the world that is foreign. And it allows you to play with a lot more of the rules of magic or whatever in that different world. You can create something entirely different, but still have the setting sort of be recognizable. So I like Portal a lot. Next up, the power of three. I'm a sucker for this one. A lot of people may think it's a little bit old hat. I disagree. I think it's good for a reason, and I love it. So, I absolutely love Prisoners to Lovers. And it does sound, but Antoinette, that's Stockholm Syndrome. I Not really. It depends very much on how it is done. And I think mostly it's done well. I think, especially if the imprisonment was not directly the the lover's fault, if he was just a guard and he helps her escape in the end and things like that. Obviously, she should not. It's usually the woman that's the prisoner. Yes, can we please have a story subverting that? Can we have a man be the prisoner or an LGBT relationship? Yes, I want it even more now. But usually it's like the man that's the guard and then the woman that's the prisoner. And I think there's a lot of interesting things to be done with that. And I really like the dynamics of the prisoner somehow having power even though she's essentially powerless. I just yes, I think it is very uncommon for me to see that type of thing and not love it. Next up is the prodigy. I don't like it. This child is super gifted and he will save the world. And I'm just like completely over it. Fitting that it's right next to Harry Potter. Um, but I think we could do a lot of interesting things with that. If we look at the effect that being called gifted has on gifted children, the way that they are harsher on themselves than the expectations and the pressure of those expectations, I think that can really be done well. You're expected to be the savior of the world by the time you're 5. That's insane. So, yes, I think there's a lot of potential here, but it's not being used right now. Next up is The Quest. Yeah, that's sort of middle of the line expected for me. It can be done well, can be done poorly. It depends on everything else in the story. The quest, I think, doesn't really affect it one way or the other. So, next up, fantasy races. Sort of expected. I think yeah, it's also sort of middle of the road. Again, the same as the quest. Can be good, can be bad. Depends on the other aspects. Depends on how it's done. I think just gives a little bit of spice to your world if you want to add it. Then we have Zuko. So we know what this is, the redemption arc. And I think it's always good. It's not something I need for every villain. Um, but it definitely it works along with that villain having another side, a good side to them. And it can work really well with the am I the monster here trope. So yeah, just solid good. Different religions in stories. sort of expected, sort of always good. I think I'm gonna put it in always good. Um, in the same way that different cultures can be done differently, I think religion always kind of gives a reason for cultural differences, and it means that there's a little bit more thought put into it. Obviously, in the same way as cultures, this can be done very badly. Um, so yeah, actually, I'm gonna move it. I think more often than not, this is probably done badly. So I think religion can be a very interesting aspect to your story, but it has to be done right and with care. Next up, we have revenge. Drinking poison and expecting the other man to die. I'm kind of sick of it. I don't think it's a good enough motivation, and usually I can't get behind a main character who's only doing something for revenge. See my The Last of Us video. I just, it's not a good motivation for me. I don't like it. So next is royalty. Just gonna drop it right there. Sort of boring, sort of over it. Every character does not have to be a secret queen or royal or a princess for me to care about them. I think I don't need to say more. I'm just sort of bored of following princesses and queens and kings. I want different people. I want everyday people caring about everyday things. Next up, we have rune magic, and I'm going to put this right at the top at I love it, give me more. Why is it split from hard magic? Because I said so, and this is my list. But mostly because I think it is used very differently. Rune magic implies that it's like writing. Every person can write. How you use your alphabet and how you put words together and stories together gives you unique power, and can have a talent for that. But at a base level, every person with education has access to the system of magic, and I think that's a really good way of going of using magic. So I absolutely love it, and I'd love if more stories use this. This saving the cat never should have been a thing. You cannot have an asshole in your story and he saves one person one time, and I'm supposed to believe he's a good character because he did that one thing, which was completely out of character for him, by the way. No, don't save the cat, kill it. I don't like it. Commit to your character. If your character would not have saved the cat in a number of other situations and does not save the cat for the rest of the story, don't just have them do that one time to build sympathy from me, and then for the rest of the story, yeah, but you remember he's an asshole now, but he has a good heart. Remember that one time he did that one thing? No, I need more than that one time. So next up we have school in stories. It's definitely going to be in between here. You know what? I'm going to drop it in Enough is Enough. I think it was a great strength of the Bridge Kingdom that we skipped over her assassin's training. We skipped over that school part. And maybe it's just because of my age. I'm not a teenager anymore. I don't go to school anymore. I think even the most magical schools are sort of just boring. Bullies and things. Yeah, they don't interest me too much anymore. I think there's definitely potential to make it interesting. Um, but I haven't seen it yet. Then we have the super secret superpowers. I'm gonna put this also in expected. It's sort of middle of the road. Can be done right, can be done wrong, can add a lot to a story, can just be a ridiculous little subplot every now and then of somebody finding out. And if everybody close to you knows about your superpowers anyway, is it really a secret or is it just private? No. Speaking of private, sex in stories. So I read adult, and I think it's very, very uncomfortable when I read about children having sex. So please keep your sex out of your young adult with like a 15-year-old protagonist. I don't want it. Um, But overall, sex in stories, I think it adds a lot. It's a physical representation of love. It can show you a lot about the dynamics in the relationship if written well. I like. So, sexism in stories. So, I'm gonna group this with racism as well. Now, this is not the author being sexist or racist and writing characters badly because of that. This is the characters in your story experiencing sexism or racism. I think we need more of this, so I'm going to drop it under always good. It's not something I necessarily have to see and will necessarily enjoy in a story, but I think we need more of it. This is the real world. If people have never seen a black woman before and then they see her, I want them to have some sort of reaction to that. Whether it is just curiosity, whether it's hate, I want there to be realistic portrayals of people's tribalism and stereotypes and expectations. And that's not to say you make every, I guess, less civilized society super sexist, because that's not the truth either. But you can do very interesting things with people's attitudes towards difference. And I want to see that. Next is rape and sexual assault in stories. Only when done right or subverted. Who Fears Death is a great example of rape done right. Any number of fantasies is a great example of it done badly. So yeah, this is a very sensitive topic and should be handled with care and not fetishized and not just brushed away. I really think that this has a lot of potential to go very badly. On a lighter note, the soft magic system. I sort of think it's okay. It's middle of the road. It's not my favorite type of magic system. I always feel like there's less ingenuity when the magic can just do anything. And I think that's the weakness of this magic system. Next we have stalking for love. I sort of understand the reason for this trope. If people are interested in you, it's very flattering. But having no regard for someone's personal space, privacy, or autonomy is bad. So I'm definitely going to drop it. It never should have been a thing, but I understand the fantasy of someone being so interested in you that they go to criminal lengths to be close to you. It's flattering in a weird, messed up sort of way for people with no self-esteem at all. So yeah, I understand it. I just don't like it. Survival against all odds. I think this is always good. Actually, it depends for me, so I'm gonna leave it in always good. The reason being, so survival is good. The elements should affect your characters. Lack of food should affect your characters. Water and water scarcity should affect your characters. Actually, I'm moving it up. You don't have to spend, especially if it's not a survival genre book, you don't have to spend all your pages looking to hunt, but just mention that they hunted for rabbits, or they looked for food, or they are starving right now. And write that into your story. How does hunger and thirst affect their mood, affect their fighting prowess? What are the long-term effects of having been hungry for a week? Are your muscles gone? Like, all of that, I think, is a really interesting aspect to bear in mind. And that's the inherent weakness of the human body. We need stuff to sustain us. So, yes, I'm going to put it right there next to weakness because these two fit together. Love it. Next up is the arena. So, I'm going to drop this in Enough is Enough. This is sort of like the Hunger Games, and we've seen this trope done so many times before. There's a battle or there's tests, and you have to fight it out, and you're one of 20, and only one can survive. And the motivation there is always kind of lacking because usually our main character is forced into it in some way and doesn't really want to be there. And then it just seems contrived most of the time. Once again, it has potential, and I think it can be done right. I think just at the moment, I'm a little bit sick of it, and it's a little bit overplayed for me. Next up, we have the fragile, weak character with the bow. And I'm gonna put this right in Never Should Have Been a Thing. If you have ever watched any of Shadiversity, or any of the other history channels, to be honest, Shadiversity is just one that came to mind right now. I'll link his channel as well. There's no reason that your weak, fragile character should be able to use a bow that effectively. Bows are really, really hard to draw. You need like 45 kilograms or something of drawstring, and it, it's not just something anyone can do. It's not like a gun. You don't just press a button. You have to draw it out. And in movies, when everybody's like standing there with their bows knocked, and I'm just like, how are you not shaking? That's so heavy. You need to put a lot of power behind it. So it's just a silly trope that was born out of lack of research, and that's why I don't like it. Next up, we have the low point. The part in your story when all seems lost, and we can only go up from there. I'm gonna put it in only done right when subverted. I'm not crazy about this one. It's overplayed. You know no one's going to die. You can see with your eyes. Like there's like 50% of this novel left. You know everybody's just gonna be okay after this. And it usually involves some friendship or some romance breaking out over some silly fight that didn't mean anything in the first place. So I know. I only when done right, and it's often not done right. Next, we have trauma, and I'm going to link this with more common mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, things like that. And I'm going to put it right at the top. I think any story when your character is killing people, having their family killed, it's it's a really good emotional arc to go through what that meant to them. Things are happening to your character. You have a plot. So what does that do to them? What does that do to the way they see the world, their experiences? How often do they cry themselves to sleep at night because they've lost so much? I think this is always a strong point in a story where you actually go into what a character is thinking. And I think it's very often lacking. Then we have this little Pinocchio-esque picture and the unreliable narrator. I think this is sort of also Love It, Give Me More. People have their own way of seeing the world, and especially if you're like a third person limited or a first person teller, maybe you don't see the world accurately. The Mandela effect is a thing. Things get misremembered and emotions come into play, and you don't sometimes your senses aren't reliable. And I think that makes the story much more interesting when we can kind of, from the cold distance of being a reader, see things that our main character may have overlooked. The next one is probably only going to be me, but this is anachronisms. In Afrikaans, anachronismes. I really hate this. I used to love the movie Gladiator until I did a little bit more research and found out that all their weapons are wrong, actually. And yeah, just a lot of that. It really pisses me off. So, what this term means is that you take an object from time that does not belong there, especially in historical stories. So, if you have a gun in the Stone Ages, that's the most obvious example. But just like research the time period you're working in, and there's enough history out there for you to more or less know what sort of weapons they might have had access to and what sort of weapons they wouldn't. Even Shakespeare was guilty of this. Just I know it would be cool to have guns in your medieval setting, but if you're trying to be like, if the rest of your story is pretty historically accurate, that's gonna pull me out. If it's early medieval and you have guns for some reason, or I don't know. It's the weapons and equipment they have access to really informs the time period, and I find it really frustrating when a lot of that is ignored to just create a setting that's not the truth. It's a lot more interesting when you look at what limitations there was to the technology of the time and try to incorporate those limitations, and look at what would strategy really have looked like if you could not really fight on a horseback because you don't have stirrups yet. Um, so yeah, I think definitely never should have been a thing. Animal companions. I hate this. I hate this because you're trying to get me to have sympathy just because it's a cute puppy dog. And I love cute puppy dogs. But it's just. Next up, the assassin. Only when done right or subverted. I need a reason why this otherwise sweet person is okay just murdering people. Um, and I also think it's a little bit overplayed at this point. But assassins are really interesting characters, and I think there's a lot of potential in there. So, yeah. Okay, so next we have the horse's ass, the asshole main character. I really don't like this, but I don't think we should limit main characters, to being only likable people, especially our main protagonist. But if he's so much of an asshole that he has no redeeming qualities, I might end up just rooting for the villain instead. So, careful. Handle with care. Next, we have the bad boy. He is an asshole, but you have to understand, he saved the cat that one time, and he has a really troubled past, and wada, and I don't care. I have never been into the bad boys. It was never a phase for me. Never in my teenage years was I like, yeah, I'd like to date a guy that smokes and drives motorcycles, and just that's never been me. So maybe this is a personal preference thing, but I don't want to date the bad guy and having him be the love interest or the MC, and I'm supposed to be rooting for him because he's just so damn edgy. No. So the bad ending. I'm thinking only when done right, but I've never actually seen it be done badly. Happy endings are so much the default that bad endings always have good reason for being there. So I'm definitely gonna put it up here. Bad endings are good. They're usually good and they're usually thoughtful, and I love thought put into my stories. Next, we have barbarians, which sort of links up to the culture and the religion thing, and I'm just gonna put it in never should have been a thing because it's also historically inaccurate. And let me explain the trope first, or what I mean by this trope. So, the barbarians are a foreign culture or a foreign race, and they're sexist, and they're racist, and they're crude, and they're unhygienic, and their technology is behind the times, but they're brutal and they're violent, and that's it. They have no redeeming qualities. They seem not to have morality or brains. They usually have a religion that requires blood sacrifice, and it's such a shallow, silly depiction, and I hate it because no cultures ever had no morality and only lived off of violence. No, this is just not a thing that I enjoy. And even if there are cultures that seem from our perspective to be very violent, um, but they have reasons behind it, and they have a more in-depth morality. They have a more in-depth way of thinking about things than this is usually portrayed. So no, I don't like this trope. The halo effect. Beauty is character. We've seen this a lot in the Brothers Grimm stories. If she's pretty and she's blonde, then she's a good person. No, not necessarily. You should actually be a good person too. You can't just tell me that the love interest is really hot. Okay, what else? Beauty is not a character trait. It's something that can affect your character. Maybe because you're beautiful, You have a lot of expectation on you because of people's perceptions, and maybe you use it to your advantage, maybe you use it to your disadvantage, maybe it's to your disadvantage. So beauty is not character. Next we have the big and stupid. I also hate this. We always have this character. He's a big lumbering hulk, but he's an idiot, so he just gets used. Why was this ever a thing? Why was largeness ever equated to a lack of intelligence? I don't know where this came from. I just don't like it. Next, we have bloodlines. So, I know where this comes from, and it comes from really bad places. This magic is in your blood, and thus, you're better than other people. So, your ethnic history, where your people come from, makes you better or worse than other people. Hello, editing on tonight, just coming in because I didn't explain it very well. So, other than the obvious bad roots in racism and things, I think it's always 100% of the time if you have a different reason for being special. If it's not something inherent to the character that they can't control, but something that they work towards or that they learn or their ingenuity, it is 100% of the time more interesting than just good genes. That's the most boring explanation for why your character is special. So, just more reasons that this is bad, and I don't like it. Next, also something I hate. So, cannon fodder is a good example would be the orcs from Lord of the Rings, and that's why I have them as the fodder. It's just that whole thing of bodies to throw at a battle to raise the stakes. But we don't care about those bodies. Those bodies don't have families, presumably. They can be butchered in very brutal ways, and they don't matter. Our characters don't face any mental repercussions for murdering people. And those people never care that their own are being killed. I really hate cannon fodder. It inherently puts less value on the lives of things that are humanoid. I mean, orcs aren't humans, sure, but that doesn't mean they're not humanoid, and they probably don't deserve rights. So yeah, I really hate the whole thing behind cannon fodder. I get that it raises the stakes, but you know what would really raise the stakes? People caring that 1,000 of their race have just been murdered. I think that would raise the stakes a lot more. Anger, emotion, humanoid lives have been lost. That matters. And then last, we have the charmer. And I've spoken about this in so many of my reviews where teenage boys are at play. I don't know, for some reason, these teenage boys just have to be so suave with the ladies. They have sex this one time, and now they never feel nervous in front of a pretty girl ever again. They're the absolute charmers. And I think this probably can be done right. You can really write a character with charisma, but just make it believable. Make your character be awkward when he's in his teenage years, and make him go through the hurdles that everybody else has to go through. You can't be a player at age 13. I'm not buying it. So, yes, that is it. This was my tropes in tiers list. There's a lot more in Never Should Have Been a Thing than I had anticipated. But yeah, so I'd love to hear what you guys think. Any of these you disagree with, any of these you would shuffle around. The tier list, as I said, will be linked in the description. So if you want to have a look yourself, if you want to rank these yourselves and send me screenshots of your tier list on Discord, I'd really love to see it. But without further ado, thank you, Whiskers, for a wonderful year together, and I look forward to the next one. Ta-ta! Hello, hello, Whiskers. So, this was impromptu. I wanted my first reactions, my clean reactions, and for that reason, a lot of the explanations are not good. And I go on a lot of rambles that I try to cut out as much as possible. So, that being said, if there are any of the tropes you disagree with, would like to know more about what I think, please feel free to argue with me in the comments. I actually really hope I have some arguments about these because yeah, I think I definitely feel very different than other people I've heard speaking about these tropes. Um, so yeah, I'll also link Daniel Greene did a similar video recently. It's actually where I got the idea, so I'll link that down below as well. Other than that, as I said, thank you guys so much for a great year, and I'll see you next week. Ta ta!